Hello, and welcome to our event today with Lisa Scottoline. My name is Luisa Smith, and I'm the buying director for Book Passage Bookstore and the very lucky host of today's event. I would first like to thank all of you for tuning in. We know you have lots of options for online events these days, and we so appreciate your support for Book Passage and our favorite authors by choosing to spend your time with us. Book Passage has a robust speaker series, and we are now holding events both in store and online. I hope you will have a moment after today's conversation to take a look at our calendar on our website and find out about all the exciting events we have coming up soon. Book Passage is able to offer these events in no small part due to the support of our customers, both near and far. So again, thank you. Today, we celebrate one of our all-time favorite authors, Lisa Scottoline. Lisa drew on her experience as a trial lawyer to write her first book, Everywhere, That Mary Went, which was nominated for an Edgar Award, and she hasn't looked back since. Today, she is a New York Times bestselling author of 35 novels and has over 30 million copies of her books in print. She's written series thrillers, standalone thrillers, historical novels, and nonfiction. She also writes a weekly column with her very, very talented daughter, Francesca Ceratelli, who has her own fabulous novel, The Ghosts of Harvard. In addition to writing, Lisa reviews popular fiction and nonfiction, and her reviews have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Lisa has served as president of Mystery Writers of America and has taught a course she developed, Justice in Fiction, at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, her alma mater. Today, we are thrilled to celebrate the publication of her second historical novel, Loyalty. In Loyalty, Lisa Scottoline combines her skills as a suspense novelist with a gripping tale of historical fiction, transporting us to the 19th century and the very beginnings of the mafia in Sicily. Her vibrant descriptions of the countryside, lemon groves, and the delicious food are only surpassed by the masterful storytelling that keeps us on the edge of our seats. The novel explores the themes of corruption, honor, betrayal, and loyalty, creating an action-packed historical epic of love and justice. We will be taking questions today, which is one of the most fun parts of these conversations. So make sure to add them to the chat. Welcome, Lisa. Lisa.
Lisa, I love you so much. I love you. I love talking with you. Everybody probably knows this already, but I love Book Passage. It's one of the best independent bookstores in the country. I love flying out there. I've been in Corte Madera a bunch of times, and the beautiful Ferry Street location, which might be the most gorgeous setting ever for any bookstore ever. But this is just such a robust online program, and you got us all through COVID, and you are the most well-read, brilliant, charming person ever. And I love, love, love you. And it's always like a homecoming when I get to talk to you. So thank you
Oh,
for having me. You always embrace, especially in mystery thriller, you embraced my entry into historical fiction with Eternal. And now again to have me back, I'm just very, very grateful.
we are so honored to have you here. And I have to let the audience know that booksellers all agree that mystery writers tend to be the nicest of the authors. We think something about getting all that blood and anger out on the page that makes them the nicest. And I personally believe that it's because we've all met Lisa Scottoline that we have this view, because she's seriously the nicest person in bookselling. Just
You're
always
very,
such
very kind. Thank you so much.
and an incredible novelist, as we see with Loyalty. I really do believe this is your best book yet. And it is just such a big, juicy uh, book that I was saying to you earlier that I love to learn history through fiction. And this escape to Sicily in the 19th century was exactly what I wanted.
Oh,
I
you're so
learned
kind.
all about the land and these incredible characters. Um, and I can't tell
Thank
you how
you.
much I love this book, but you do set us up with four very distinct storylines.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit about what this is about, this book?
Look, I mean, you're so kind, Louisa. And the truth is, I've never done this before. And I must tell you that anytime you sit down and write a novel, you think, I've never done this before. And that's actually true. I mean, I've written 35, but every time you sit down, it's a different one. And so, Eternal was in mind, and but a little bit Eternal had three different points of view. But frankly, they were a main character who was a woman and two guys that she has a crush on. It's kind of a coming of age story, and they all live within about a mile of each other, or a, and in Rome during the rise of fascism. And so, in a way, those stories were interconnected. And that answered the question for me: why did Italy follow fascism? I mean, I'm very proud to be an American, but also proud of my Italian background, but not in love. I sort of wanted to understand more what Italy was thinking. Why do people follow fascism? Or, in particular, why do they follow Mussolini? And what can we understand about people and history and politics and justice writ large? And a little bit what happened for Sicily was that I kind of wanted to answer the question, why did the mob start there? I mean, it's an unfortunate historical fact that the Sicilian mob was the beginning of the mob, and it was in the 1800s. And I kind of want to know why, because I'm curious. And like you said, Louis, you kind of want to learn history, but not in a dry way. And unlike Eternal, when I went there, I sort of started to understand a little about where the mafia was born, which was in the lemon groves around Palermo. So that would be my mafia guy. I wrote without an outline, kind of crazy, but also fun. And then, like, yeah, it's life in the fast lane for a middle-aged woman. Okay. Other people drink and party and smoke cigarettes. I write without an outline. Woo! And get crazy with three little
Hey,
cavaliers.
I couldn't do it. So yeah.
I sort of well, so I had my protagonist who would ultimately be the first mafia family, and then we can talk about how I found kind of the well, his antagonist, but really the good guy, who's actually I go there and I see that there's actually a secret society, which
Oh,
is right. I didn't make it up. It's real aristocrats that formed an organization called the Beate Paoli because there was so much corruption in the law made by the colonizers that they're a circle that decides to do good and they're going to help a kidnapped boy. Okay, so I have a good guy and a bad guy. But then what started to happen was I traveled more throughout Sicily and I went to this incredible, charming fishing village. And then by the seventh one, I say to myself, you can't write Sicily by only writing Palermo. That would be writing like the United States, but only going to, 76th and Lexington or some New York. And, it's, you can't, it's, my ambitions grew, is what happened. I said, Lisa, go ahead, go there. So I'm like, well, then you need a character in a fishing village. And I ended up being a single mother. And I am kind of a single mother. Well, not kind of, I am. So then you go, oh, that's interesting. And then when I traveled to the kind of mountainous region of Sicily, which is so different from the lush, irrigated lemon groves or the coastal, salty spray, rugged coast sea towns, and you're in this desiccated, dry, can't grow a damn thing, hard scrabble. Sicily was so impoverished in the 1800s and so much illiteracy, and they were so far behind. And I also discovered something that sounds crazy like middle school time, but the Spanish Inquisition, the Spanish, nobody says, I think of Monty Python every time. Their chief weapon is surprise. Nobody
nobody expects a fantasy.
expects that. And you see the awful, horrific effects of something happened in 1492 in a novel set in 1800s, which is to present times. The Spanish Inquisition expels some 40,000 Jews who lived in Sicily from the island on pain of death and torture. Any Jews they can grab, and any Muslims as well, are tortured and killed. There are Jews that remain behind because they don't want to leave a land they love. And so they practice their religion in secret and they hide who they are because they're being persecuted. They were called conversos or moranos, which is a Spanish derogatory term. And basically, I said, well, what about that? Because basically, I also saw that the New York Times about 4 years ago did an article and said that Palermo is trying to get Jews back to the island. All the synagogues had been converted to churches. They couldn't even get 10 people, 10 Jews. And I said to myself, this is amazing and horrifying because what it means is that the Spanish Inquisition, of all things, accomplished what the Nazis could not. That even in modern day Sicily, there are no Jews. And so I said, you've got to write about that. You can't ignore that, especially because I'm always interested in that theme of law that doesn't lead to justice, but law that perpetrates injustice. What could be more onerous or more awful? And so I have a character who lives in this mountainous town, and he is the last Jew in Sicily. And so it ends up being loyalty, ends up being a novel about the first mafia family and about the last Jew in Sicily. And you have four disparate characters because, unlike Eternal, they couldn't all live in Rome, they
Mhm.
didn't. And basically, you're going to tell each story and you're going to hope to God as you're writing it that they come together in some way. And that's when you actually believe that there is a deity who looks out for women who write without an outline. Thank you. And ultimately, they come together, and then the story proceeds. And it ends up being, I hope, actually, what I ended up hoping was it was not only the story of Sicily and how and answering the question, why was the mafia born there, and why then, and why there, but also ends up being a larger story about the world writ large, because that we all have been colonized at one time or another, and we all have had a group come in that will make law that will benefit rich people or corporations or feudal people or nobles, and in various ways oppress people. And so you kind of learn, and then I'll shut up in a minute. I'm getting carried away with the beauty of what it is to be an American, because people come here, and the great experiment that we are is equality of opportunity. And I
Mhm.
remembered all the stuff that I learned in law school and also taught in law school, that the purpose of equality of opportunity is not an end in itself. It's the pursuit of happiness. And that led me to understand that part of the reason the mafia grows in Sicily because there is not that equality, and nobody can rise up. And women are locked up. I mean, you're chattel,
Right.
and you're given to convents and rich men, and you have no agency whatsoever. And so you understand that the roots of criminality isn't endemic to any particular group. Of course it isn't. It's to the economics, and that's a wonderful, to me, that's kind of affirming of life, because it says the more equality we have and the more happiness, the less we will prey on each other and the more we will support each other. That's what I think I
Yeah.
taught myself. Vote for me.
There's so much. I mean, you touched on so many things I want to dive deeper in um here. And similar to the book. The book is such a big, juicy thing to there's so many ways to approach it. Readers of historical fiction are gonna love it. Readers of thrillers are gonna love it because it brings all of that together. But one of the things you started talking about was this character Gaetano and the community, this secret society and justice. And he's a young lawyer. You were a lawyer. How is it you've written about justice and law for years in your thrillers and then now writing about it in 19th century Sicily? What things are similar between those and what things are different?
That's so interesting. I think anybody who writes, well, here's the headline for me, what I've learned now that I've written two books of historical fiction and decided that I get to pontificate, although you know that any kind of mom basically has a lot of advice and no one around to give it to. So fortunately, or unfortunately for you, Louisa, and your audience today. But I think what I learned honestly is that those uh, setting in place end up being superficial. That's
Mhm.
what I taught myself, which those are differences for sure, but they're, as lawyers say, they're distinctions without a real difference. The feeling of justice. Now I have to sort of, for me, I have to imbue it in Gaetano, because for him it's very aligned with faith. He and that St. Paul, it's not Christian per se, it's about the view of the common good, which is actually, if you ask me, kind of an agnostic person, a lovely view of what religion should be,
Mhm.
what's good for everybody. And religion was very tied into ideas of justice then. And certainly every religion has ideas of social justice as a kind of a religious goal, which is such an interesting confluence of things. This wonderful idea that God, however you worship him or her, wants us all to be good to each other and to take into account our fellow man. Such a wonderful idea of justice. Sometimes I'm going to figure out a way to prove that justice and beauty and love and peace are all the same thing. Like,
I
are
love that.
all right? Are all words for the same feeling. And so in a way, the differences ended up being superficial, but the one difference that is not that is material is that you do the research with history that you don't, and it's kind of fun and great. Look, you're in front of a bunch of books. This is only my signed book collection, all from independent bookstores, by the way, and plenty from yours. You know that you love doing that research, but you have to be right as to everything has to be accurate. And even for my case, the voice has to be different because I have a kind of a distinctive crime fiction voice. It's a lot like me, I hope that it flows smoothly. But when I started to write Loyalty, certainly Eternal, but at least Eternal's the 1930s. Loyalty's 1810, and you go, well, you can't talk the way you talk. So
Mhm.
you steep yourself in period fiction, which is so great. The Leopard, wonderful novel, and a
That's
wonderful
my
novel.
favorite novels, by the way.
Oh my God, right? It's
Yes.
fantastic. And it was unbelievable research because for people who don't know, it's the story of the Prince of Lampedusa, kind of written by the Prince of Lampedusa in this time frame. And you start to also learn that it was the changes in the law that in a way created this situation, because in 1810, when the law changed and allowed nobles to sell their property, then people could buy it, but they didn't have the money to buy it. So it was sort of very interesting thing. But that novel certainly was seminal because he describes, it's so beautifully written. The story of that novel is interesting too. Shall I tell it briefly?
Oh, please.
Well, yeah, because I've read Lampedusa, which is the story about the story of the novel. Fantastic
I've never
nonfiction.
read that.
That's incredible memoir of him. And he basically wasn't, it's a little bit about also, that you when you're writing a novel that's sort of about class, like Loyalty, it can't just be rich people bad, poor people good. You have to find the humanity in everybody. As our great friend Sandra Brown likes to say, even the villain is the hero of his own story. And so you start to understand how nobles were trapped too, and you really understand that when you read the Lampedusa, because he basically his whole life had all his advantages, but always wanted to be a writer. But no one really wrote or picked up a pen or worked in his class, and he didn't know if he could do. And he had kind of a set of frenemies who he wrote this book like a few years before he was quite old before he took up the nerve to write it, which I
Mhm.
identify with. And he and showed it to a friend, and long story short, the friend's like, it's not very good. And it was like, and he died before it was published. And then it was published, and it became his wife sent it to, and it became the best selling book of all time in Italy. Now, if
Wow.
that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what does. And when I started to read it, I thought about him too, because first off, I'm a little insecure anyway. But when I moved to historical fiction, I was like, you can't do that, Lisa. Like you say, mystery writers are very friendly, and we kind of are. I don't know why we're like this. And I didn't know anybody but mystery writers and crime fiction writers. And I was like, the historical fiction writers, I was like, I don't know if I can sit at that table. I just
Oh.
felt like I don't know if I can sit at that lunch table. Like it's still a friggin' high school analog, which is ridiculous. Like you take Latin and they take French, and you're like, what? Anyway, turns out they're super nice ladies.
They are.
That's when you come to the conclusion that people who
Yeah.
love books are uniformly awesome.
Mhm.
Awesome. And
That's
that's whether
true.
you write them or you read them, right?
Yeah.
I think it's because we have so much empathy. I think it's because we read books and we develop empathy. We become so open hearted and open armed and open minded.
Mhm.
Um, that wasn't the question, but I'm sure
No,
the
but I love the answer. And
kind of
you know what?
true.
You brought up something else that I think it works so beautifully in the book, and I definitely have a question about, which is you talk about how even the hero is the I mean, even the villain is the hero in their own story, showing these characters as being, you know, complicated for the reasons that they're reacting and what's happened to them in their lives. And these early mafiosos, the men that are forming it early on, um, they don't start out well. I guess a little bit. One of them sort of a villain, but not. They're really complicated characters, and you see a lot of the things that we think of having watched mafia movies. So I feel like an expert.
Yeah, me too.
I'm, Sopranos. I know everything. So, the things
Memorized.
that you feel are very sort of mafia traits, and you see in your book how those things actually started, how how they grew out of Sicily in the 19th century, those beliefs, those things that they held sacred, the belonging to a group. I mean, they talk about that. I think Franco is the one that talks about with the belt buckle. Like the value of this is people want to belong to something, and this shows that you've been deemed worthy. Like that need for doing, even the name mafioso, where that comes from. Like all these things, the need to be macho, the need to like all these, being part of the Omar, was the word Omerta,
Omerta. Yes,
Omerta,
silence,
all
right.
of that, that it actually came from 19th century. It isn't New Jersey,
No. It's so I was fascinated by it. And also, you go back to is he really bad? You kind of have
Mhm.
to look at what choices you have. And
Yeah.
in a way, it brought me back to the end of Eternal. I'm not giving anything away about this end or even Eternal. But at the end of Eternal, we've been through the Holocaust, and people died in the book. And at the end of the book, I have the main character. I have somebody has to give a toast at a wedding, and all of the main characters people are gone. And then I realized that the person who's going to give the toast has maybe said about two sentences in the book, which is, Louisa, being a brilliant editor yourself, could be like literary malpractice. Like, Lisa, what are you kidding? What have you done? You should have done an outline. The reader's not going to know who she is. But I said, just lean into it. So I had her go, like, I'm not used to speaking. I never leave the kitchen. But I look at the table and all these lovely people, but I see the people who are missing. And I remember her thinking, it's like when I go to my kitchen and I see, well, I have to make dinner and I'm missing an ingredient, but I have to make dinner. And I always ask myself, what can I make with what I have? And I thought
Mhm.
that kind of works because everybody can, that would be a housewife's question, but it also ends up being a very humble way of saying, how do I survive? And in a weird way, that's where loyalty started. Because here you have Franco at the beginning, and he does something that's not very nice, but he is doing it. And you're not apologizing for it. You're understanding that given his choices, he doesn't have any. He is doing it what he needs to do to
And he
survive.
actually is doing something much nicer than what he could be doing. So
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
not clear that he's a terrible, terrible person.
And you're a genius because that was what I was really hoping that people would see, that there is a part of him that's good, but there's a part of him that will do what he has to survive.
Mhm.
And throughout the novel, and loyalty and choice are interesting concepts
Yeah.
because sometimes people feel like they have no choice when they're loyal. I love the notion of loyalty. I regard myself as loyal. I am loyal to you. I'm loyal to Book Pass. There's loyalties that we build up and
Mhm.
they reinforce our connectedness, but they can also obviously be very dark and also just completely incorrect. You can't follow somebody off a cliff. You have to have a moral compass. And when does that kick in? Why is it, obviously the mafia turns it on its head and loyalty becomes a weapon and not a shield. But
Mm.
I wanted the rear to. I love complicity. That's an Eternal a lot too. When one
Yeah.
person becomes a fascist and his friend is Jewish and is being oppressed, he has to say, how far will I follow this credo? And that's something that I think we all have choices about. And we have that even today. So I think that's embedded in loyalty. And those end up being timeless questions. It's
It,
kind of great,
it, and I love how every character in this book has something that they are loyal to. The one that and it's all very different. It's not the same thing at all for each of them, but they have huge reservoirs of love, that they want to give, that they've attached to something outside themselves, whether it's, religious or to a group or to a person. The only one that sort of interesting that you have in there that is kind of he's interesting because he can't until a certain point attach that to anything. He doesn't recognize it in himself because he's been so cut off is Dante, because he's
Yes,
been raised outside of that. So he gives us a great mirror then to reflect back as he tries to find it. I mean,
right,
what an
right. So
interesting character that you
it's
have
so
in
perceptive.
him.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, he's the little boy who's kidnapped in the novel, kind of the precipitating event. And he's a child when it opens, but also then it led me to this incredible discovery of a real life person who here's
Oh,
this guy, Baron Pisani. And I went to Palermo and who he was, and his story is even heartbreaking. He's a real, because I love when you can get this, like you say, it's history, but in a but in a fun way. And I discovered this. I'm like, that's what actually started me on the novel. I discovered a book called the Royal Madhouse of Palermo, and I said, "Oh my God, that's
Great
incredible!"
title.
The title. In fact, it was so cool because a minute ago you said what they hold sacred, and the original title of this book was Sacred,
Oh, wow.
which is so incredible that you sent you felt it. I know. And the funny thing is, I only jettisoned it when I saw it on a cover, and it's a funny word. Honestly, it
Yeah.
looks funny. It looks like sacred. You don't know what it means. I'm like, well, that can't be the title.
And that's sometimes it is funny how that
Weird.
you think it would matter and it totally matters.
It
Yeah.
totally matters. I'm like, I can't
Yeah.
stand it. It looks horrible. But I forget. Oh, so
And that
Dante. So here we are, and I find this incredible book from 1830s. I buy it, and then it's only in Italian, which is the kind of thing you might want to look at before you spend $300 on a book. I actually paid to have it translated, which cost me less than the book
oh
itself.
my God.
You know what it was? I couldn't find. I was like, this if this is going to be your thing. And then what you learn is that there was a man, Baron Pisani, who lived in the 1800s in Sicily. Again, another noble trapped by his class. Right? It's a gilded cage, but he's still a human being. And he studies art. He loves music. He has a child. He loves his son. His son grows to teenage years and passes away. And it was all horrible for Baron Pisani because he loved his son so much and they played music together. He falls into what he calls a melancholia, and he cannot get out of it because in those days, 1800 Sicily, unbelievably behind, lunatics, as they were called, were kept in Palermo in a former convent that also housed lepers, syphilitic people, and people with tuberculosis. And lunatics are chained to the wall. That would be his fate, but for his class. And he starts to listen to more and more music, missing his son. And he
Mm,
realizes that after a period of time that he turns to the arts, music, art, literature.
mm,
And at the same time, he's visiting the lunatics and going, it brought him out of his melancholy. So he decides that there should be something called moral therapy. And on his own, gets his friends to fundraise, and they open a hospital, and they convince all their rich and powerful friends to let him run it. And he becomes a forerunner. He takes the shackles off of people like Dante, who were beaten, who were treated
mhm,
horribly, and exposes them to the arts and music, brings in piano players, lets them to have jobs he banishes the term lunatics. In the hospital, they become the people who keep the hospital. And worldwide, who visits him? Edgar Allan Poe, Dumas the Elder, Booker T. Washington comes to his place in the middle of Sicily that was behind in so many ways, not an intellectual capital by any means. And the heartbreaking end to the story of him, not in the novel, but he's in the novel, is that when there's an outbreak of cholera in 1834, he is ensconced at the hospital, he runs it. He will not leave his patients whom he loves, and he dies there with them of cholera. And I thought,
mm.
that needs to be in a book. And it's Sicily, such this land of these contradictions where people are so behind that they have all sorts of folkloric beliefs and superstitions, some of which I was raised with my Southern Italian ancestry. We're throwing salt left and right, man. We're throwing salt all up. We don't open umbrellas. We tie red things to babies. Um, we don't put shoes on tables. It's so disgusting to put a shoe on the table, but I'm like,
Oh, for a
well,
second I thought you meant put a shoe under the leg of the table. I'm like, why would you do that?
no,
You
you
mean
can't
put a
put
shoe
shoes on the table. All these things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to
Mhm.
be so enlightened to recognize the humanity in people who were mentally ill long before Europe even recognized it. And all of that's so that's we can't give anything away, but that's in loyalty too.
Wow. And you mentioned how it's behind, but it also has been exposed to so much. So Sicily, I mean, it's in the middle of the ocean in some ways, not part of Italy, but it has had the Moors in charge of it, had, all different groups that went through this island that had influences on the island.
Let me
Oh,
read the quote because I won't, I say it, I will quote it badly, but it's a quote by Goethe in his Italian journey because he went to Sicily and was crazy about it and wrote this incredible memoir, which I read about it. And there's a lot of travelers. It must have been a thing in the 1800s and late 1700s that when you traveled, Dryden did it, Dryden did it. They just wrote little journals about what they found. And some ways they're horrifying because they're kind of, you know,
Yeah.
they're racist basically. But they give you, because I had to see what was it like then, what
Mhm.
buildings stood, what plants were there, and they catalog everything. But Goethe said to have seen Italy without seeing Sicily is not to have seen Italy at all, for Sicily is the clue to everything.
Wow.
You know what? And I had been to Italy a bunch of times. And until I went to Sicily, I was like, he's that guy knew what he was talking about.
No slouch, that Goethe. But what's going there? Because you're writing historical fiction. It's still new to you, but wow, I imagine what a great place to write historical fiction about because so much of it has been captured in time there that hasn't been overrun, right?
Exactly. Still there. In fact, when you go to the mountain towns and the one I went to, it was the mayor that took me around, because they're one of those towns that are trying to get people to come back. It's interesting because part of it is the lack of business there, and part of it is the mafia influence. That basically there's generations that are not there, so they need people to come back. So they're selling houses for €1, and the houses look the way they did forever ago, and they're
Ah.
incredible. In fact, I should mention this. It's in the Forgive me because it's the nature of a plug, but what I did, I get so excited, Louisa, when I go there. I'm like this, right? I'm like this all the time anyway. You think I had espresso? No, it's really just the Croy. But I take all these videos and then I decide, frig it, put them up on my website. And so people can go and see them because they're a wonderful companion. If you want to see the town of Musomelli,
Right.
and where you would live in a cave or what, they're all videos that I filmed. And actually my amazing assistant and best friend Laura Leonard made an interactive map where if you
Mhm.
go to like chapter 4 in the book, you can see where in Palermo the secret organization met and what church they met in. And there'll be pictures that I took up. It's not like stock photo time. It's me because you can tell because my fingers usually on the. My daughter's always like, "Mom, just move your finger. Look before you." But I
Yeah. My we used to tease my parents. It was like Mr. Thumb goes to Europe because our
don't say that about your dad. I love your dad. Genius author, Martin Smith, please.
it's
Mr.
terrible. He always did that.
Too funny. But so Sicily is so inspiring that way. And then there's stuff like silly things like the goats. I went on a trek through Sicily to
Oh,
find. So Alfredo, I swear to God, I'm probably Alfredo, who is the last Jew in Sicily who lives in a cave, and his life is his goats. Because I live alone in a house in the suburbs of Philly with 3 dogs, and they're like everything. I have a cat who turned 16 today. But I'm telling you, this cat looks at me every day like she's never seen me before. I'm like, show me a little affection. The dogs are all over me. They're out now. But I mean, anyway, I can write Alfredo. But to go and we went on a little search to try to find goats, and we actually did find a lot of goats and milking goats, but we couldn't find the Girgentana goats.
so
But I,
special.
but it ended up being interesting because I didn't plan it this way. As you know, you're not writing with an outline. Things just, but I do believe your brain gives you stuff. There's that wonderful book that's out now by Rick Rubin about creativity.
Oh
And I
yeah.
really like it. I recommend it to people who are want to write. I have it on audiobook too. He has a very nice Zen voice. But he says something that I've always sort of thought, which is this is 35 years teaching myself, and I hope it's encouraging to people who want to write, because I know you have a lot of serious readers and writers who go to Book Passage. Um, let your subconscious talk to you a little. Your subconscious is working on stuff that you don't even know. And it's really important that you actually get out of its way. It sounds a little woo woo, but when I was there, I was just really understanding, taking in each of these characters and thinking these would be 4 characters. And then I came home and I started to write them and write each story. I realized, well, these are all outsiders. And I
Mhm.
didn't go, you're going to write a story about 4 outsiders, because that's kind of formulaic. I wish I knew what the formula was. I never have a formula. But it was really more, I was like, well, that's very interesting. Where is that coming from? And you end up finding, an emotional truth in each of the characters that's
Mhm.
part of you. As all of us get older, I think we start to see aspects of ourselves or go in different directions. and go, oh, I used to be a little bit like this. Well, I still have that remnant. So what's it like? Can I channel being Alfredo in a cave with three goats? Well, yeah, I lived in COVID. I mean, most authors are sequestered one way or the other. It doesn't happen if you leave your desk and go have fun. People are like, can you have lunch? I'm like, no, I can't have lunch. That's not how it works. And when I'm always in a little bit of a spell when I write anyway, or being a single mother and being expelled
Mhm.
from your village.
Yeah.
Well, I was a single mother, so you're always looking, or a crusading lawyer. I kind of think I did that. And you basically, what's it like to be a person with no choices? Well, I was broke for a long, long time when I was trying to write. 5 years trying to get published, broker than broke. So broke that you don't even like want to go in a mall because it's just depressing. You can't afford anything, and you have no business being there. So you don't want to go. What will you do when you have no choice? How
Mhm.
desperate can you get? And so these four characters end up having some commonalities that I didn't realize until the writing process brought that out.
Wow. I love
Books are magic.
they are.
They are.
I loved Alfredo. He may be my favorite character. I love him and his daughters. Uh and I also loved Mafalda, and I they were so interesting because they did, including them, rounded out the story and allowed you to show the natural landscape of uh, of the countryside, of, you know, from the animals and what they eat, and from the what you could gather if you were going along, having to hide and forage for yourself. Um, did you choose to have them be the ones that sort of brought the countryside to life in this book?
No, because it just happened. I mean, I realized what they were going to tell their story, and partly she's expelled, so
Mhm.
I was actually, I mean, I was like this. I was like, Lisa, what are you doing? Like, and I will tell you honestly, there I wanted to I was like, geez, these are four main characters.
Mhm.
That's a lot. Will that be hard for readers? And basically, I can't tell you that I read all my reviews online. I go in Goodreads. And I'm happy to see a lot of people say, I read her in crime fiction. I don't really read historical fiction, but I'll give it a chance, and they like it. That's great. I've also seen people say, wow, four characters, that's a lot, but they all come together and it's
Yeah.
kind of great. It's a very different way to tell a story.
Mhm.
But I think when you go somewhere and you steep yourself in it, like when you drive around Sicily, you end up walking a lot, as you do in Europe. You're on foot more,
Yeah.
and I'm walking more, I'm sweating more, and you going, Lisa, this is such good details. I just take a billion notes. And then it ended up being, well, okay. And all of these characters are thrown back on their resources. And in a way, it all comes back to Maria and Eternal, because they all have to survive some way. And sometimes I feel like, even with crime fiction, you're telling a story that ultimately is one of hardship. People are going to come through that hardship, and they're going to come out the other side in some credible way, because you can't pull any punches.
No.
I mean, it's true in crime fiction, it's true in historical fiction. You can't fudge anything. Like, I couldn't have somebody get a train and something wasn't invented yet. In crime fiction, you can't have some dopey ass,
Mhm.
some dopey clue that you planted there.
Right.
Everything has to be organic. It ends up being a test of the character and of the character of the character.
Mhm.
And in a way, that's why I read, to feel a little uplifted. So even though they've been through horrible hardship, there's a
Mhm.
lot of hardship in this book. When I was in Sicily, I was amazed by the obviousness of the faith, which
Mhm.
is Catholicism. I'm a collapsed Catholic, we used to say in our family, not just lapsed, collapsed. And you see, you'll be in a bar and there'll be a picture of Christ, and it won't just be Jesus Christ like my aunts and uncles used to have, a calendar with a beautiful cerulean background and kind of heavenward eyes. It's bloody thorns. It's really Catholic ideology, man. It is
Yeah.
faith writ vivid, and it's everywhere. And there are the ex votos, which I ended up collecting and buying, which there's churches, more churches, and there's so much religiosity in Sicily. And I started to read more about it, and also to read the period fiction of it, and go, the peasant, so called, of the time needed faith because faith got them through this hardship, starvation, misery, being oppressed by law and by landowners, and having no hope of all the things that Franco has no hope of. He's finally turned, he can't even love who he loves. He can't buy land. He can't do any of the things that we take for granted. There is no equality and no hope. You realize how the critical an emotion is hope. And they had none. But faith gave them hope of an afterlife and hope of goodness and hope of communion. And that's still true in Sicily,
I see why you wanted to call it sacred when you
right?
say all that stuff. Yeah, very much.
Everything was sacred. I was
Yeah.
feeling it so much.
Yeah, because they had to have that. I have to
They,
say that one of the things that you did so beautifully, and you do it beautifully in all your books, this isn't actually unique to this one, is you're really good about setting the scene, the details, all the details, but not bogging us down in them. So your stories are propulsive still. You're still moving forward at all times, but you feel like you're in the place. You know, you're not going off. I mean, and I think it's really hard with historical fiction where you can go down these very interesting pathways that lead to nowhere, just extra details about stuff. Do you find that you're in an advantage because of your years of writing, suspense thrillers, legal thrillers, to keep the motion going, that you can set it and move forward at the same time?
well, two thoughts. The first is that Hemingway says, write drunk, edit sober. So I don't write drunk, but the first draft is you telling the story to
It's
yourself and
everything.
praying, right? Praying to God, they come together, praying to God, it has an impactful, praying to God, it all works. And then it does. Pace is something I say to myself, and for people writing out there, you don't even think about first draft. Pace
Mhm.
is something second draft. But setting is so important, and permit me not to, but I learned about setting from Martin Cruz Smith.
Oh,
And I might have told you this story in person, in private, but I will tell it too, because you did ask the question. It's, I think of him every time.
oh no.
Because, yes, yes, because there was he wrote, first off, I read everything, and he wrote Havana. And I loved as everything, all of his novels. And when I read when I read Havana, I noticed at the beginning is all about Havana. I've never been to Havana. And I was taken in by the setting. But when I read it, I said, this is so interesting because there's not really action necessarily. There's a lot of setting, and it's also compelling. And then I didn't even know your dad. I was on a panel of the Sydney Writers Festival, and he was too. And I was such a fan. And I was like, oh my God, that's him. And I said, I just have to ask you. I'm like, I want to ask him this question. And I said, listen, you don't know me, and I'm just a huge fan from Philly. And he's so gracious and nice. And I said, but I
And
have
he's from Philly.
I was like, in Havana, way you took a chance because especially in crime fictions, everybody's like, must happen right away, loyalty. The kid's kidnapped on the first page. We're taught that
Mhm.
make it happen. And he said, setting is a miracle. I remember him saying that to me, and I said, why? He said, because setting grounds the characters. Setting gives an authority. It's not just about place. Setting is about character. Now, understand that that's a revelation because in the world, we like things compartmentalized. We always say like plot and character and setting are different. Even voice is different. And I've often thought that voice and character are the same thing at the same time. We
Okay.
don't like that because we don't like to think of, I think it's that natural law that two things cannot occupy the same, but they actually can, and they do in the creative arts. And your dad is the one that taught me that setting, take your time, don't worry. You let it breathe, tell it true. You can't just be homogenized setting. You better know what setting you're talking about. And as soon as you do that, setting will give an authority to your characters. He said, as soon as then when that character walks in the door, you know that this is a person who lives in Havana. And that tells you something that you didn't know before you even meet him. You asked it. How amazing that's a true answer. I'm telling you, it
Oh,
happened in Sydney, Australia. And I
it's
never forgot it.
oh.
Learned so much from wonderful writers like your dad. I love to read. I love his books, and it's a blessing of my life that I get to read, and that's what I have in common with my readers, that we, just get to lose ourselves in these books and find ourselves in books
Yeah.
too, right?
Yeah. And, I think you are doing, I mean, every time, every book, it is such a joy, such a joy. And it is something of where you love these characters, you love this place. It is hard to do four different storylines and have it be compelling. I mean, a great editor friend of mine, Juliet Grimes, who's the editor of, so she said every time you change perspective, you have to gain the trust of the reader again. So every time you do that, it's really hard to ask them to do that again. They have to trust that this is going to be worth it. And you made me I trusted every step of this. I
Oh,
believed every step of this book. I just loved it so much.
thank
I
you.
know we have questions from the audience, so I could keep asking mine because you know me, I could keep
Sure, sure,
asking
sure.
mine, but I want to make sure we get to some. And if anybody else would like to put in a question, please go ahead. This is from Dominic Johnson. There are many big issues you handle in this novel, and it sounds like it could easily have been four novels. How did you bring all of this together, especially without an overview?
Yeah, I
Wow,
think
that is hard. Yeah.
it's a honestly, it was just sheer good fortune because part of me said, sometimes when you're writing, and it's an interesting question, so maybe Dominic is writing too. It will sometimes happen. Let me see if I can explain this. Where you think, oh, I think I know what would happen next, but does something need to happen before that? And you're a little uncertain. Now,
Mhm.
then sometimes what I've done in the past, I go, well, write what you think would happen, which is the thing you're worrying about that you think you need before. I always call it the getting ready to get ready feeling. And then I start writing that thing that I think should be before, and I realize that's like filler. You're writing filler. I always think of Elmore Leonard's quote: "Leave out the parts that people skip."
Yeah.
Now that's a second draft kind of concern. But now I'm trying to get better, and after 35 books, I should be able to do this. So you go, well, you know what? So basically, you basically hope that you can't lose anything once it's taken hold. That you go to yourself, I have to write four characters, so I'm just going to have to earn this. I'm just going to have to earn it every damn page because I can't write it without reference to all of them, and all of them lend something, and all of them are going to come together, and somehow they will be greater than the whole, and that will be resonant. That will really pay off big, and that's what you want for the world. You want people to come together and be bigger than ever before because you're together. That's like weird and connected to empathy and books and all that stuff. So I just really hope that happens. And as I didn't even have to force it. Partly it was the geography of Sicily that gave it to me. Partly it was where people would be going, and I can't give anything away, but it gave me some twists and turns along the way. And I was like, you know what? I'm listening to the audiobook now, and I can say great things about this audiobook because I weirdly don't feel that I wrote it. It's an incredible performance by Eduardo Bellerini, and I'm listening to it and going, oh, that's surprising. I always think of Stephen Sondheim, the wonderful playwright, who said, surprise me. It
Mhm.
has to go the other way. It can't just be what you expect. And real people will surprise you. You
Mhm.
know, it's bad fictional people who don't.
Yeah.
Real people are unpredictable. You're like, wait, what? Wait, what? And so I hope that answers the question, Dominic, but it really ends up being a very organic thing. And I probably should start praying to God who watches out for me.
We just had the great Rupert Holmes on, and he was talking about how sometimes his characters, he thinks he knows what's going to happen, and the character opens the door, and the person on the other side is not who he thought it was going to be. Does that happen to your characters sometimes?
Yes, I believe it. I do think that happens. And I used to hear that when I was younger and think that seems kind of BSy. And then it's really true.
Yeah.
It's really true. I think it happens if I can deconstruct in a moment that when characters are behaving in a way that's consistent with them,
Hmm.
it's completely kosher. And the truth is, they're revealing themselves to you as you go along and write their story. Honestly, just like life. We think we're a certain person, and then COVID comes. And how do we react to COVID? Do we say, "Oh, I'll wear a mask," or "Masks are part of who I," whatever your reaction is to a
Hmm.
stimulus, you learn some, you lose people. Sadly, we're lucky to be here. We've lost people in COVID. We know people who are sick in COVID. How do we react to any event in our life? Teaches us. You think you know what you do. You don't always know. I've surprised myself, and not always in a great way.
We have a customer here that's wondering what it's a two-parter. What are you working on next? And what is Francesca working on next?
Oh, how kind. Well, I had just written what happened to the Bennets
Mhm.
because I'm kind of doing alternating domestic thriller and historical fiction. And happily, I should say that we have a TV deal for What Happened to the Bennets just last week.
Oh,
After 35 years, I'll have something on television.
congratulations.
I'm a book person, so I'm delighted that it's in a book. And I'm working on the next domestic thriller, which is called The Truth About the Devlins. I think that will stay because I kind of like that title. And I'll go finish it when I'm done book tour. And my beloved daughter, Francesca, and thank you for Louisa mentioning it, wrote Ghosts of Harvard, her first novel, and she is working on her second in New York City. And it's funny because it's so wonderful. I always try to give her advice, and she's always like, Mom, I have an editor, and I only have one mom. So you be the mom. As your father, I don't know if your father tried to give you advice.
Well, I help edit my dad, so he has
There
multiple
you go.
editors, along with my sister and my
God
mom.
bless you. And it's interesting you said because my daughter made a wonderful edit in Eternal.
Oh.
Yes, it was interesting. One of the scenes, it doesn't matter, but I had Marco in a station, in the railway station, and she said, "We need to see that action instead of telling about it later." And I was a little
Mm.
nervous. I mean, I had my insecurity attack. I didn't know if I wanted the character to actually be in a scene with Mussolini. And she
Mhm.
said, "You need it." And then I was like, "Why not, Lisa?"
That's
And we
great.
did it. And then I did it again in the book. And then it made it much easier in Eternal. When I had Baron Pisani, a real person, I was like, don't be a step removed. Go
Mhm.
for it. And my daughter gave me that impetus. So daughters unite, man. You
That's
crush it.
great. I love your daughter.
You did
She's
a great
wonderful. And
idea.
Ghost of Harvard is a great book.
Thank you.
Everybody
That's
go
very
out.
kind of you. I'm very proud of it. I think she did such an amazing job.
She did. It was a lot of fun. It was a great book. I know we just have a few minutes left. I always have to ask Lisa because we both love sweets and cookies and things. What was the best thing you ate in Sicily?
Oh my God. You know what it was?
What?
It was cassata. Cassata
Mm.
is old school. It is like Sicilian traditional. It's probably like liking apple pie if you're American. So good. You can't. You know what else was good that people can taste? Prickly pears. I never had I never
Wondering
heard.
about that.
Okay, I never heard of prickly pears before I went there. And then I went with Laura, my bestie, and she's like, this was a thing in drinks. And it's so funny because they can watch a video on my website. This will show you how dopey I am. So I'm like the poor man Stanley Tucci. I'm going through Sicily and I'm eating things going, oh my God. Because as soon as you taste something good, all you can say is, oh my God. Every time he does that, I'm like, oh my God. And basically, I tasted a prickly pear, and I'm sitting here. I'm supposed to be a wordsmith, right?
Mhm.
So I'm like, "What does this taste like?" It's called prickly pear. I'm like, "It tastes like an apple." Well, I can't think of what it tastes like. It's like a really juicy apple. And then we end the video, and Laura says it tastes like a pear. I'm going, "Yes."
I love it. I'm a wordsmith.
Man, Latin roots, I got you covered. So if you can have a prickly pear drink anywhere, because she said that was a big thing. I'm like,
My
maybe I'll
daughter
have
drinks that. Yeah. And,
delicious.
and they're bright pink.
They're beautiful, and magenta is my favorite color. So it was like a beautiful color, and it was like a drink. It was delicious and so succulent. Now I'm
Wow.
thirsty. Tell somebody some and pretend you're in Sicily because you'll love it.
Oh my goodness. That sounds wonderful. I'm surprised though, I have to say that you didn't say something with lemon in it. Some sort of
Look, there's lemon in cassata. I mean, there's
there's
this
lemon.
cassata has lemon in it.
So, okay, I don't think I know what casata is then.
It's like a special Sicilian pie that has lemon and lime and is cool, it's delicious.
Ooh,
It's so good. It's kind of like a lemon curdy thing. I love lemon curd.
wow.
I
Boy,
know.
that's
I
perfect.
know. It's
It's like I think I'm ready for my afternoon tea now, Lisa.
I know. You deserve it, honey.
I do. You do. Lisa, thank you so much. It is always such a treat. I can't believe it was a year ago that we were just talking
I
about
can't
Venice.
either. And I was so
And
looking forward to this. And Louisa, you're just the best and the smartest and the kindest and the
oh,
just you
you
really
are our
are.
favorite. And
Thank
and
you so
not
much.
just book passage. I mean, I was talking, Lisa knows this. I was talking to Otto Penzler at Mysterious Bookshop this morning. He was saying how Lisa's the best. I was talking to Michael Barnard about you. He says that you're the best. All booksellers, we all agree. Lisa's
Well,
the
we love you back, and I just know how lucky I am in you, all of you, and in your readers. It's so nice that everyone
oh,
came. Take care of Book Passage. You know they are one of the best indies in the whole country. They have been thriving despite incredible hardship. Please support them.
oh, thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you, everybody that tuned in today. We will have the recording of this event up on our website soon, so you can share it with your friends. I hope you will, because I think it was full of so much joy. And the book, even though the book has a lot of hard things, it does end up in a place of joy and hope, I think. And I think that's something that everybody should know going into it. It's a beautiful book, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Louis. I really do.
Congratulations on
Thank you so,
all.
so much. Stay well.
Thank you, you too. And thank you to Zach, who helps make us look professional in the background there, and all of our friends out there. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye. Thanks again, Louisa.
Thank you.